If you live in Europe as an immigrant, no matter if it's been decades, whether you have built a business, raised a family, or paid your taxes, you should be worried. Because in 2025, things have changed. Not quietly, not slowly, but like a sudden storm that tears the roof off while you sleep. Entire communities are being dismantled, block by block. People with legal residency, work permits, even asylum protection, are being told to leave, often with little or no warning. Forget the slogans about diversity. Forget the handshakes at immigration offices. Across the continent, from the cliffs of Normandy to the far edges of Eastern Europe, a wave of deportations is sweeping through cities, suburbs, and villages. And it's not just undocumented migrants anymore. People with clean records, students, refugees, even children born on European soil are being placed on one-way flights back to countries they barely remember or never even lived in. This is not policy reform. This is a purge. So the question becomes chillingly real. What happened to the promise of Europe, and which European countries have begun deporting immigrants? In this video, let's find out. Number 10. Bulgaria. You wouldn't expect it. A country once associated with Orthodox monasteries, rustic mountain landscapes, and quiet countryside tourism, has now become one of Europe's most aggressive enforcers of deportation. In 2024 alone, Bulgaria pushed back more than 52,000 migrants at its Turkish border, according to reports from watchdog organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. The most alarming detail? Many of these individuals never had access to legal proceedings, and in some cases, they were reportedly abandoned in border zones without food, shelter, or communication. The Bulgarian government defends these actions under the banner of national sovereignty, arguing that such measures are necessary to preserve security and social order. But this official narrative is undercut by the country's economic reality. Ironically, Bulgaria is one of the fastest shrinking nations in the EU, with hundreds of thousands of Bulgarians themselves emigrating to Western Europe for better opportunities. Despite this internal crisis, the government continues to pour millions into border surveillance, militarized patrols, and physical barriers to deter incoming migrants. Reports from humanitarian NGOs paint a darker picture still. Beatings, forced detentions, and migrants sent back across the border in freezing conditions. Bulgarian refugee camps, far from being shelters of hope, are overcrowded and under-resourced, with little access to legal assistance. International observers have repeatedly condemned these practices as violations of European and international law. But Bulgaria is not flinching. It's building fences, installing surveillance drones, and even negotiating with neighboring countries to create a multi-layered buffer zone that keeps asylum seekers far from its interior. For migrants hoping to find safety, Bulgaria is no longer just a tough entry point. It's a fortress. Number 9. France. France, long viewed as a champion of human rights and a refuge for displaced populations, is now drawing international attention for all the wrong reasons. In the third quarter of 2024 alone, French authorities issued 30,800 deportation orders. During that same period, 4,240 individuals were forcibly removed from the country. This marks one of the most aggressive periods of immigration enforcement in France's recent history. What's driving this wave? Officially, the government cites national security, economic concerns, and the need to reduce illegal immigration. But critics argue that the real reason lies in electoral politics. With right-wing parties gaining traction and public opinion increasingly skeptical of immigration, the government is under pressure to appear tough on borders. The tactics are aggressive. Dawn raids in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods, mass detentions, and expedited court proceedings have become more common. Entire families are being removed overnight, sometimes before legal appeals can even be filed. More disturbingly, reports have emerged of individuals with pending asylum applications or even legal residency permits being swept up in these crackdowns. Major cities like Paris, Lyon, and Marseille are seeing a visible shift. Once diverse, vibrant immigrant communities are thinning out. Community centers are closing. Schools are losing students. And in their place, fear is growing. The paradox is stark. France, a country that famously inscribed liberté, égalité, fraternité on its national monuments, is now being accused of institutionalizing exclusion. Legal watchdogs and immigrant rights organizations are sounding the alarm, but the machinery of deportation grinds on. Number 8. Germany. In 2015, Germany shocked the world with an unprecedented act of compassion by opening its borders to over 1 million refugees, mostly fleeing conflict in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Chancellor Angela Merkel became the face of humanitarian Europe. But fast forward to 2025, and the landscape has changed dramatically. Between July and September 2024, 13,600 deportation orders were issued across Germany. What was once the continent's most generous asylum policy is now giving way to a cold and systematic expulsion process. Charter flights carrying deportees are departing with increasing frequency, sometimes filled with people who have lived in Germany for years. The new trend includes individuals with children, jobs, and community ties. Some are plucked from schools or workplaces with little to no notice. Others receive letters informing them they must leave within days or face forced removal. Regional governments, particularly in conservative strongholds like Bavaria and Saxony, are intensifying their efforts, turning deportation into a political competition. The race to remove migrants has become a visible litmus test for who is tough on immigration, especially as Germany braces for upcoming elections. What adds to the shock is that many of those targeted aren't criminals or fugitives. They are former students who missed paperwork deadlines, workers whose visas expired, or asylum seekers whose cases were rejected despite compelling reasons. And now, the very country that once welcomed them is sealing its borders emotionally and administratively. Immigrant communities feel betrayed. The safe haven they once believed in has changed its tone. It no longer says, "Will comin'." It now says, "Time to go." Number 7. Spain. Spain has long been seen as a more relaxed European destination, especially for Latin American migrants who share language and historical ties, and for North Africans crossing the Mediterranean in search of safety and opportunity. But in 2025, the tide has turned dramatically. In just 3 months, Spanish authorities issued over 13,600 deportation orders and forcibly removed more than 3,100 individuals. The sheer numbers tell part of the story, but the real horror lies in how it's being done. Migrants intercepted at sea are increasingly being denied the right to file asylum claims. Spanish coast guards, under government orders, have allegedly abandoned people in boats, sometimes in inflatable rafts, pushing them toward North African shores with little to no supplies. It's not just illegal crossings being targeted. Spain has reportedly deported residents with valid but expired papers, and others facing bureaucratic delays have been denied renewal windows. Inside Spanish cities, immigrants describe an atmosphere of quiet fear. Madrid and Barcelona, once hubs of multicultural life, are seeing immigration raids that rarely make headlines but leave families broken. Workers are detained on job sites. Students with visa delays are being flagged. Minor infractions, like traffic violations, have triggered deportation hearings. What's most alarming is the silence surrounding it all. Spain has avoided the overt, bombastic anti-immigrant rhetoric seen in countries like Hungary, but its policies are just as effective and just as cold. For many immigrants, the Spanish dream is becoming a nightmare wrapped in red tape and shadow operations. Number 6. Greece. During the height of the Syrian refugee crisis, Greece was hailed globally for allowing hundreds of thousands to cross its shores, seeking asylum and safety. It became the gateway to Europe for many fleeing war, hunger, and chaos. But now, in 2025, that same gateway has transformed into a brutal bottleneck. Over 17,000 people were deported in 2024, but the numbers only tell half the story. Greece has adopted methods that many human rights organizations are calling outright illegal. Reports from multiple watchdogs say that Greek authorities are detaining migrants en masse, placing them on makeshift boats, and leaving them to drift back toward Turkish waters with no engines, no navigational equipment, and no support. This tactic, widely condemned as a violation of international law, has been described as a form of state-sponsored abandonment. On land, the situation is just as bleak. Entire refugee camps have been emptied, with less than 24 hours' notice. Families are uprooted and placed in deportation centers, often without any chance to defend their legal status. Even those who have spent years in Greece, waiting on asylum decisions or working legally, are suddenly being deported under retroactive enforcement of new policies. In Athens, Thessaloniki, and other major cities, the raids are increasing. Police target immigrant neighborhoods. Business licenses are revoked. Children are being pulled from schools mid-term. The once celebrated Greek hospitality has vanished, replaced by a cold bureaucracy that's now being used to erase entire communities. The country that once symbolized Europe's open-hearted response to migration now stands accused of institutional cruelty. For migrants, Greece is no longer a safe stop. It's the edge of the cliff. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs, impacting your lives. Number 5. Poland. Poland's transformation has been perhaps the quietest yet most chilling among all EU nations. In 2024, the country deported over 35,000 people, many without public hearings, media coverage, or even proper notice. The term now circulating among rights groups is silent expulsions, and they are not wrong. What sets Poland apart is the speed. Under new fast-track deportation laws, migrants can be arrested, processed, and removed in under 48 hours. There's no time to file appeals, no public defenders, no human rights observers. Whole families have been detained in the middle of the night, sometimes without even having time to pack. Their whereabouts remain unknown for days, sometimes weeks. Even more concerning is that the crackdown isn't limited to undocumented migrants. Legal residents, including foreign workers, longtime students, and asylum applicants in process, are being swept up in these mass removals. Minor administrative mistakes, like expired work permits or delayed tax filings, have been used as grounds for expulsion. There are reports of migrants being sent back to conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa, despite international conventions forbidding such actions. Polish officials defend these deportations under the banner of national sovereignty and border security. But rights groups argue that the line between law enforcement and ethnic cleansing is becoming dangerously thin. Poland has positioned itself as the quiet executor of Europe's hardline immigration policy. But beneath the silence lies a deep erosion of humanitarian values. And for migrants, it's a nightmare that knocks without warning and vanishes without a trace. Number 4. Hungary. If you thought Hungary was already hostile to migrants, 2025 shattered any remaining illusions. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government doubled down with a vengeance, introducing what critics call legalized disappearances. The infamous new pushback laws grant border police the authority to expel migrants without legal review, no lawyers, no judges, no appeals. It's a one-way exit, rubber-stamped by administrative fiat. Even individuals granted asylum years ago now find themselves subject to sudden re-evaluation. Humanitarian protections are being revoked at lightning speed, under a new vetting system that seems designed to fail applicants. Legal residents who have lived in Hungary for a decade or more, with families, businesses, and even Hungarian-speaking children, are being reclassified as threats due to arbitrary criteria like minor clerical errors or unverified employment status. Businesses that employ migrants are targeted with sweeping shutdowns, not only as punishment, but as a warning. The goal? Erase the presence of immigrants not just physically, but also economically and socially. Critics argue it's not a deportation policy anymore. It's social engineering. Hungary now resembles a locked fortress patrolled not by guards, but by legal technicalities. And the key to get in or stay no longer exists. Number 3. Latvia. Latvia doesn't make the evening news. There are no shocking visuals of immigration raids or mass arrests. But make no mistake, because the deportation machine here runs just as ruthlessly. Only it runs silently. Since 2024, Latvia has quietly refined what experts call administrative deportation. Instead of confrontational removals, authorities revoke work permits, deny residency renewals, and fabricate bureaucratic obstacles. Migrants are left confused, unable to work, rent, or even access health care. Eventually, most leave on their own, forced into exile by policy paralysis. The most alarming cases involve people who have lived in Latvia for years, tax-paying, law-abiding residents with children enrolled in local schools. Minor paperwork delays or address mismatches are enough to trigger a notice of removal. There is no trial, no hearing, just a letter and a deadline. Families are caught off guard, sometimes receiving expulsion orders in the middle of their children's school year, destabilizing entire households overnight. This silent purge is compounded by Latvia's increasingly strict nationality laws. In some cases, dual citizens or long-term residents from non-EU countries are reclassified and subjected to additional scrutiny, with their legal status quietly revoked. The appeals process, if available at all, is buried in red tape and rarely successful. The government insists it's streamlining its immigration system. Human rights organizations call it institutionalized exclusion. Legal aid groups have raised alarms over the lack of transparency, noting that many deportees are not even aware they are under investigation until it's too late. Number 2. Croatia. Croatia's glittering Adriatic coastline hides a growing shadow. Behind the beach resorts and ancient ruins lies one of Europe's most chilling deportation programs. Border guards now intercept migrants not to process them, but to abandon them. Reports from humanitarian groups reveal that people caught without documentation are being placed on buses and dropped off in remote forested areas near the Bosnian and Serbian borders. No food, no phones, no way to contact anyone. Just pushed out like a problem swept under a rug. Inside Croatia, immigration enforcement has grown increasingly aggressive. In cities like Zagreb, Split, and Rijeka, dawn raids and random checks have become the norm. Migrants, even those with legal status, report being detained without explanation. Courts often side with the government, citing national security and border integrity. The pressure doesn't just come from authorities. Migrants also face rising hostility from segments of the local population, emboldened by state narratives framing immigrants as threats to Croatian identity. NGOs working on the ground report a spike in verbal abuse, workplace discrimination, and denial of services. The government claims it is simply maintaining order, but critics argue that the true motive is image management. Croatia wants to market itself as a pristine destination for tourists. And immigrants, particularly poor, non-white, or visibly Muslim migrants, don't fit that image. Number 1. Denmark. Of all the countries on this list, Denmark's transformation is perhaps the most shocking. Once praised as a bastion of liberal democracy, the country has become the blueprint for systematic exclusion. Denmark has introduced what are effectively deportation camps, which are remote housing centers for rejected asylum seekers where services are deliberately stripped down. There are no job opportunities, little access to education, and minimal health care. Some camps are so isolated that even public transportation is restricted. The purpose? Make life unbearable until people voluntarily leave. But it doesn't stop there. Refugees who were once granted asylum are being reassessed. Authorities now argue that countries like Syria or Eritrea are safe again, despite evidence to the contrary. Families who thought they had found sanctuary are now being dismantled. Even economic migrants and skilled workers are under threat. New income thresholds and language requirements are being used to disqualify visa renewals. Entire families are being broken up, with one parent ordered to leave while the other, often with children, is allowed to stay. The Danish government has also created what it calls the return centers, where people with denied asylum claims are sent. These centers are heavily monitored, restrictive, and socially isolating. The goal is not reintegration, but discouragement. And looming on the horizon are the 2026 reforms, which aim to tighten immigration even further. Under these new laws, even high-earning foreign professionals could face deportation if they fail to meet Denmark's increasingly rigid cultural integration standards. Attending Danish culture classes, demonstrating fluency in the language, and fulfilling neighborhood participation quotas may soon become mandatory checkpoints. Denmark's message is cold but clear. Deportation isn't a last resort. It's the policy by design. Do you live in any of these countries as an immigrant? Isn't it frustrating that despite living for years and contributing to these countries' economies, people are being kicked out as if they meant nothing? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on how the citizens of these European countries living abroad should be treated to make their government feel how unfair it is. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.